Hey guys, MiracleMAX again. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a look at a headlight restoration. Check out this one. It clearly needs some attention. So let's get into it. I'm not suggesting that this is a definitive test, but it should give you an idea of a before and after shot. So this is what it looked like before I did the restoration. I guess you'd have to agree that this headlight lens has seen better days. They live on a farm property, all little bugs splatter over the top of it, and of course the old UV rays get in there given time, and it forms this oxidization on top of the plastic. Not only that, it doesn't look great, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is that we're losing a lot of light. And of course, because they live out in a farm property, as I said, they need all the light that they can get to avoid all the kangas and the wombats and anything else that might be wandering across the road late at night. So I'm going to try and restore these headlights for them and get them back to their former glory. There's quite a few restoration systems out there on the market. I've chosen the 3M Headlight Restoration System simply because it uses a drill, which makes the restoration process a lot quicker and easier on me, and hopefully will give a good restoration. So right out of the kit we childproof wrapping. Serious? How hard is it to undo a piece? Oh, here we go. Whew, that was tough. Okay, let's start again. So right out of the packet we end up with the Headlight Restoration System. We open him up, chuck out a bit of plastic. We'll get some instructions, which are great. We get a rubbing compound, which is necessary to start the process. And then my favourite part is the section that we hook onto the drill to make it a lot easier to carry out the process. And then we have buffing pads. We have little scouring pads like sandpaper, etc, etc, etc. So it goes down finer and finer and finer. So I'll explain the process as we go through. For starters, we need to wash it down so that we get rid of any bugs or abrasives like dirt, etc, that may damage the lens further. So give it a good clean down with soapy water and then rinse it off with clean water afterwards. The next step involves masking up the areas that don't need to be restored. We don't want to damage any of the paintwork. Take your time doing this. You want to make sure that all the paintwork is covered correctly so that you don't get any abrasive material on the paint job itself. And it's not a bad idea to actually double up with the tape. You're not looking for prettiness with the tape, but simply to make sure that it's all covered. Side and carry out the same process. done some sanding already. The goal is to make sure that it's nice and smooth and even. You don't want any hot spots in there. So backwards and forwards at a consistent rate. And if it does tend to clog up, don't panic, because there's 4 of these yellow discs, the P500s, in the kit. So you can afford to use 2 on each headlight. If they do tend to clog up like this, just give them a bit of a bang, and you'll notice you get rid of a lot of the dust that's in there, and you can reuse it for a little while. Time to change the pad. I've now run out of my 500 grit discs, so I've had to go into my sandpaper box and dig out some, at the moment I'm using 600 grit. This is wet and dry, so you can get into all the corners, but as you can see there's still a little bit that needs to be tidied up, and those discs I could have used with another at least 2 or 3 discs, because I'm just not getting the coverage that I need. So you might need to invest in a little more sandpaper. This is 600, 500, 400, something along those lines, that will get it back to all of it to this milky area over here, this dull colour. That's what we want overall. So work in circles as you would expect, and we're trying to get rid of any imperfections that are in there, any little lines, particularly, I know it seems strange, but actually you're trying to get rid of the clear section of the lens as well, so it's all one colour. I've now gone through 4 sheets of 600 on top of the discs that I've used with the actual kit. So do yourself a favour, go and get some, not necessarily wet and dry, but do it in the dry condition. 600, 400, over there on the other side I had to use 400, it was quite bad. This is one of the worst lenses that I've had to do. As you can see, I've got it fairly even all the way around. One word of warning when you're using this as opposed to the disc: keep your hand flat, don't use your fingers like this, you'll end up with little lines everywhere. So even when you go into the corners, try and keep down like that. If you've got to go into a shape like that, just bend the paper and go into the corner like that, making sure that you try and keep your hand flat at all times. I'm fairly happy. Keep in mind this is only stage 1 of the process, so it's not too bad for now. We've got to go on to the next step now. Don't wet it, but just use a dry rag to remove any abrasive material before you go on to the next step, which is 800 grit. As you can see, this 800 grit is a lot finer than the 500, so we're trying to get it down to a really smooth surface before we start to polish it. So the final 800 grit disc. I don't believe that you get enough sandpaper in the kit. As far as I'm concerned, I needed to bring in more sandpaper from my box that I used to have when I was panel beating. So when you start this job and use this particular kit, make sure you have backup sandpaper in the various grits. That way you can do an excellent job. Preparation is the key, guys. If you do this job properly, the final result will be magic. Once again, wipe down the lens to get rid of any abrasive materials before you go on to your next step. Now, they tell you to go on to a grit of 3000, which is very, very fine. As I mentioned, I went through my sandpaper box and I found a few extra sandpaper bits. I'm going to go to a 1200, and then I'm also going to go to a 1500, simply because I have these with me. I'm going to get a better final result simply because I'm going through the sanding grades at a slower rate, at a finer rate, and I should be able to get rid of any little sanding marks from previous sandings. You may already notice a difference, and the reason being is because I'm using soapy water just sprayed onto my 1500 grit that I'm using, and then I wash that down on a regular basis. It really does work. Old spray painting trick, but use a little bit of soapy water onto your paper itself. Oops, sorry Mr. Camera, have I got you? Don't know. And just, it'll look pretty bad to start with, but then when you wipe it down, it will come up like magic. This, keep in mind, this is before we do any polishing. This is purely the preparation work. So guys, spend the time on the preparation, because the end result is going to be absolutely magic. By comparison, that is. Final in the sanding process is this 3000 grit sandpaper. Because it's so fine, as you'd appreciate, they suggest, like we did before, by spraying it with water to create that white slurry that will indicate that we're getting rid of a lot of those little sand marks. I'm going to try this for starters with the drill, and then I'm going to finish it off by hand. Bit of a wipe down to see how we're going, and you can clearly see that we're getting back to that clear lens that it started out with originally, that is. Keep in mind we haven't even polished it yet, so that's starting to look pretty good, hey. I'm just going to do a few more passes on it just to get it to its final stage before polishing, but I'm really happy with the way that it's coming up. We've got rid of all that oxidation that was on there before. We've got a fairly smooth, even surface that we can work on, fairly consistent all the way through, and we've got rid of all those sand marks. So a couple more passes and she should be ready to polish. Also, if you get part way through, you might notice that some of your masking tape gets either wet and starts to fall off, or when you're sanding it, it might tear off or something like that. So just make sure that you dry it and put on a new piece, just to protect the area of the paintwork. So we're down to the pointy end of the repair, and I just noticed that the camera has splatter marks all over it. Looks like it might need a bit of a clean up later. Next is the rubbing compound. Just a matter of cutting the end off, and you have a disc that goes onto your drill, just a little pad, a polishing pad. Put that on there, a tiny bit of compound in the middle, and like that. Put it to one side, then you smear it over here. I know that sounds a bit weird, but the goal being is that it doesn't create splatter all over the place, which it will do. Now the idea, of course, is to gently buff it once you're up and running, but don't let this pad run dry. If you need to, add a little more compound in the center there. Moment of truth, let's have a look. Mightn't look too great at the moment, but I'm going to finish it off by hand once I do the other side, because I don't want to run out of compound. By finishing off with a piece of cotton material like an old t-shirt or something, we should be able to continue with our buffing process, and then we get a clean rag and we polish it up highly just with a clean rag. And now for a final polish just with a dry, clean rag. Let's see what happens. Ooh, Maxi like. So as you can see, even though I used that kit, there's still a fair bit of elbow grease involved in getting it up to scratch. Well, not original equipment. Not absolutely perfect, but by far heaps better than it was before, hey. So how does that compare to what the lights were originally? Let's check it out. So this is what it looked like before I did the restoration. Well, clearly a difference, hey? Definitely heaps more light than there was before. I think there'll be less roadkill on the road as a result of these restored headlights. Whew. That was still a fair bit of work despite having that little disc that goes onto the drill. I've done both methods using it by hand plus the attachment onto the drill, and I must say the drill did make it a little bit quicker, but there was still a lot of hand sanding and polishing to be done. So they give you about half an hour to do both headlights, and I think, yeah, not going to happen. You know, it's a bit way over the top. It took me hour and a half, I suppose, to do, but I'm happy with the results, and I'm sure that the customer will be as well. So I hope that this will keep this vehicle out of the road of your skippies and your wombats, and keep these customers safe in their vehicle. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please subscribe to this channel. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. Always feel free to comment down below. I'm interested in what you have to say. Until next time, this is MiracleMAX signing off. I'll catch you later.